Good morning. I welcome you to our services this morning, and we're really glad you're here, and glad to see everybody. I hope you've enjoyed this series thus far. We've tried to do our best in trying to present the incredible lessons behind this man, his life, his loss, his heartache, his sorrow, and all of those expressions that define the man. Because like the book said, there was a man who lived in the land of Uz, a man who feared God, shunned evil, and was upright and blameless in the sight of God. Now this morning, this is number 3. I want to, because for the next several weeks, you're going to, we're going into the actual drama. This is where the drama begins. Now Job has spoken, and here they have sat for 7 days and 7 nights. His 3 friends, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, and they're all here. And now the drama begins. And the oldest, evidently, Eliphaz seems to be the oldest from what we can gather from the book, and he starts it off. And so he is named first, he spoke first, and at least according to chapter 42 of the book of Job, the Lord seems to accept him as the older of the trio that we meet here. Now keep in mind there is a 4th man who evidently is the youngest of the group, and he will speak much later in the book. But it's interesting that Eliphaz is from a place called Teman, which is, as we know, is associated with the idea of wisdom. He seems to be somewhat of a traditionalist. He holds very clear. He worships the God who seems to be an inflexible lawgiver. But Eliphaz, as we learn, as we study and listen to what he says, seems to have a little bit of a rigid theology. There just doesn't seem to be much room for grace and mercy of God that you heard in your prayer this morning. And then there's Bildad. Of course, he is, from what we can gather, the 2nd oldest, and then he speaks up. He seems, at least in my estimation, he would seem to be the individual that would be considered a legalist, if we can use that term. And Bildad, which is almost incredible to me, if we see it in the scripture, Bildad is of the opinion that Job's children, all 10 of them, died because they were sinners. And so this gentleman, Bildad, seems to have no feeling whatsoever for his friend who is hurting and who now sits on the ash heap. And then thirdly, the youngest of the 3, as we can try to imagine, is probably the most dogmatic of the 3. He speaks, interestingly enough, Zophar speaks only twice. And so I'm not sure why. Maybe he felt he was unable to answer Job's arguments, or maybe he just felt that it was just a waste of time trying to persuade and convince and help Job. But that's Zophar. And to me, it seems like he's the kind of an individual that sounds like he's a professor or a teacher that's scolding a freshman class. He says, "Now know this," and he's very dogmatic and very bold. But he just seems to be merciless. Again, not room for a lot of grace and mercy. And then it's something incredible that he says. If you look at chapter 11, verse 6, now understand this message here, and I don't know if you've read ahead, but chapters 4 through 14 is basically what we're going to try to cover this morning, so we have to move rapidly. But amazing thing to me, in chapter 11, verse 6, he was basically saying that God was giving Job far less than he deserved. And I just find that almost incredible. So these are the men that we're going to be listening to. These are the men who are going to try to help their friend. But as we all know, Job says that they were a bunch of useless, worthless comforters. And we learn that as we read through the book. So those are the three: Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar for now. And then we will eventually meet up with the other gentleman in a couple of weeks. Now, as we know, the book obviously deals a lot about suffering. And then, as we do know, as we study the scriptures, and as we stand back and look at the scriptures in its panoramic view, and even the 42 chapters of this book, we know that suffering, which is pretty much the theme of the book, that suffering comes to us at various ways, and it comes from different sources. We know that. According to this book, we know that God allowed adversity, or God allowed the devil to go out and do what he did to Job by attacking him and touching him and bringing about all of this travesty on his life. We know that. And then we know from Psalms 107 that suffering is a result of our own sin. The idea of that verse says, their transgression, their iniquities, makes it very clear that we bring it on ourselves. And then in Proverbs 14:11, we know from that verse that it's the result of somebody else's sin. We all suffer sometimes at the hands of somebody else. Our loved ones die because somebody who was drunk rammed their vehicle and killed them. We suffer because of other people's sins. The Bible's clear about that. And then in Hebrews 12, that whole section there about how Lord disciplines or chastens us. God is into disciplining His children, just like our fathers here this morning disciplined their children when they had to. And then we know there's an interesting thought that comes to us from the book of Ecclesiastes, in chapter 9 and verse 11, the fact that that time and chance happens to all of us. So once again, just because you're a Christian this morning does not mean that we are exempt from heartache and trial and pain and sorrow and all of those words that you can think of. That's clear. It happens to all of us. Now let's get into chapter 4. As the book opened, then Eliphaz the Temanite answered and said, "If one attempts a word with you, will you become weary? But who can withhold himself from speaking? Surely you have instructed many, and you have strengthened weak hands. Your words have upheld him who is stumbling, and you have strengthened the feeble knees." And he just goes on and on and on, and he talks about, and in essence, he is commending Job in his former way of life. Before all this calamity came upon him, Eliphaz knows and understands that Job had the respect of the people. He helped people because he had that ability to do. And then in verses 7 through 11, we don't have time to go through it, but he seems to talk about his philosophy and from different perspectives. And in verse 12, he says, "Now a word was secretly brought to me, and my ear received a whisper of it." So as you read down through the rest of it, he basically starts to talk about and relate and give us his philosophy or his take on things. And then verses 12 through 21, he relates this dream or this message that was given to him. And then in chapter 5, verses 1 through 7, Eliphaz is very clear that he is going to warn Job